Schelling. All right, so this is good. I'm going to put this in here. So I've talked a little bit about toy models. I think that's going to be something I'll touch on through this set here, right? So toy models are fantastic things in that they can show us narratives or behaviors of systems that we couldn't intuit. And especially ones that are about collectives and group behavior. We're not very good at understanding that, right? We tend to impose narratives of individuals on lots of things we see. That's easier to understand. We are individuals, something we'll come back to later on. This is so Schelling, who's passed away now, I think. He was a Nobel laureate in economics. And if you want to, these are, I think, well, we've got these are really beautiful books to read, some of these old ones. They're very clear and thoughtful and so on. And he may not be right about everything. But, they're very thoughtful pieces. But he did a lot of, he constructed what I would call, in physics you call them toy models. So model of segregation, right? So this is, a real sort of ongoing issue, of course, but a very specific sort of issue was happening in the 50s. And he was wondering that the general sense of this was that you have two ethnicities, say, and they just don't like each other. Like no one in each group likes anyone in the other group. And so of course they split apart, right? So you see this global behavior of these groups splitting, and then the easy narrative on top of it is that all of the individuals do not like the other group, right? So completely makes sense that this happened. So I'll come back, I'm going to look at that visualization with you there. So what comes out of this is he started thinking like this. Two different types of coins, put them on a checkerboard, and just laid them down randomly, and then gave them little rules, which was if they have a percentage of people or coins of a different type around them, they would want to move, and they'd move randomly. So it's this really simple little simulation. This is in the 60s. He did some stuff with punch cards, I think, but I think he had one of his kids, and they just messed around with it. So they ran these little simulations. Lots of other things there. So this is if you've heard of tipping point, right? So that neighborhoods were said to tip, and that's where it comes from. The tipping thing. As far as I understand it, it was used there, and now we have this tipping point, and Malcolm Gladwell has done bad things talking about it. Okay. So has anyone seen Nicky Case's work in general? Nicky Case, so she's, I think they have a pretty fantastic set of things you can play around with here. And a lot of them are, and I've been meaning to talk about them, and this is the right place to start talking about them. There are lots of pieces in here. So this one is something we'll get to later on, which is networks. I think I'm pretty, they were asking for ideas at some point, and I think I suggested this. So that may be the result of that. This is the one we'll talk about here, but lots of little, really interesting little games that are often about complex system things. So this is polygons, right? So we have blue squares and yellow triangles, and so you can move them around in some cases to make them happy. So this one, so now they'll smile, right? So they'll smile when they're happy. And it's so the game is that you play around with these thresholds. So in this case, they all want to move if they're a third of their neighbors, less than a third are like them. So we'll start to talk about thresholds. This is a very useful word for social phenomena. You have thresholds with respect to all sorts of behaviors. Potentially, there's hard things to measure. At least they make sense theoretically. And so once your threshold is exceeded, maybe you start behaving in a certain way. So this one, so I don't know if I can move these ones. Oh, seems sad still. Yeah. Can I move these ones? So you can play around with these things. Let me get this to work. Yeah, okay, good. So there's a new board, so you can just mess around with this and try to get them into places where they're happy. And I guess once they get to a happy place, you can't move them, right? So there is it's not easy to see from the start, like how this will play out. And let's get to a little simulation one. Right, so these ones it's an easy thing to do, right? So then you end up with segregation. All right, so here we go. So this is a movement one. The segregation is going up, and it became quite bad, right? So I think that's what that one is. Yeah. So in this case, was it a third in this case? So they have a bias, right? It's just a third, I think, in this case. So I have to remember that. But you end up with global segregation, right? So randomly assigned global segregation. And you don't have them being like, the individuals here aren't that intolerant that this would suggest. They're intolerant to some extent, but not absurdly so. Okay, so here's the threshold, right? So this is the 33%. So you'll move if, let's make it 50%. So even if you want half of the people around you to be like you, it ends up being segregated. It's a really nice little visualization. Even there. So I guess I've said this. So even less than 20%. Of course, this is where you're really, this is the simple narrative, right? Everyone wants to move. Oh no, sorry, less than 100% of the neighbors are like me, yeah. So this one's just messy, right? You're happy with all sorts of things. Stop, sorry. Interesting. So you can get some complicated behaviors. I think down here there is this one. This is the hipster model. We made a hipster model of this, sort of. I mean, it looks like segregation. But if everyone's like you, then you want to go as well, right? So this one keeps going. You don't want everyone to be the same, right? So you want some diversity. I don't know if you can read these things, but that's it did stop. Okay, so lots of things to play around with there. But, wow. And then so you can change this, right? How many are empty, right? You can play around with all sorts of things. So very nicely done. But the big upshot of this was, as I said, it was a checkerboard to start with, was, this potential way for a macro behavior to come about was revealed. I mean, it was from a little toy simulation. It doesn't mean that's the way things work. We've seen like the rich get richer model from Simon can fit the reality extremely well, and we'll see that again with icing models, for example, for magnets and some other pieces that I'll touch on. They can actually fit quantitative, like really get accurate agreement, which is very strange. This is just a story kind of thing, right? This tells you here's a particular dynamical path that can give rise to this macro phenomenon that we more easily, and we couldn't see this story. This is a hard story to see. So again, this is toy models are, and obviously a lot of toy models don't work and whatever, that's fine, but they're super powerful things.